Monaco 64 here, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I decided to do just a quick live stream. It might run longer than just a quick one. It's uh, it's just past midday in London, October 10th, 2018, Wednesday. And I saw a story, and I needed to do this video. I tweeted it out, but it looks like Twitter is not like passing on my tweet. And you can see the title of my live stream is "We Can Manipulate Markets, but You Can't." And what's that supposed to mean? Well, there's a story on Zero Hedge, and it says Steve Mnuchin, U.S. Treasury Secretary, says U.S. will make sure China isn't manipulating the yuan. And this is what he says. Steve Mnuchin said in an interview with the Financial Times that the Treasury monitored currency issues very carefully and noted that the Chinese renminbi had fallen significantly during the year, adding that he wanted to discuss the currency with Beijing as part of trade talks. And he goes on to say, as we look at trade issues, there's no question that we want to make sure China is not doing competitive devaluations. So who have we got here? IK's here, LaBook84, Aaron Levy. Good morning, Aaron. Awesome title. What do you think about the bond market going to 326? Well, it did that. I think yesterday was the high. The thing about the bond market, if we keep having days like we had on Friday and Thursday, when yields spike very quickly in a short amount of time, then it's bad. It's going to be interesting to see if they can keep yields from going too far north of 325 for the week. If we close somewhere around 330, 335 this week, we need to keep, it's an alarm bell, so to speak. Yeah, so why am I saying, you can't manipulate markets, but we can? And where do I get the proof from this? Well, I'll put even the link for you guys on the chat here. And this is coming straight from the U.S. Treasury, USTreasury.gov, a link to their Exchange Stabilization Fund. And I'll read a little bit here about, it's not very long. I'll read about the Exchange Stabilization Fund, okay? It says the ESF consists of three types of assets: US dollars, foreign currencies, and SDRs, special drawing rights, which is an international reserve asset created by the IMF. The financial statement of the ESF can be accessed at reports or finances as operations. And it goes on to say the ESF can be used to purchase or sell foreign currencies, to hold U.S. foreign exchange and special drawing rights assets, and to provide financing to foreign governments. All operations of DSF require the explicit authorization of the Secretary of the Treasury. So the Secretary of the Treasury is in charge of this fund. We don't really know exactly how much they've got. They started with a couple of billion, I think, in 1934. And that money they got from the money they stole from the American people, And what do I mean by that? Well, when they confiscated Americans' gold in 1933. So I'll go further. The Secretary is responsible for the formulation and implementation of the U.S. international monetary and financial policy, including exchange market intervention policy. The ESF helps the Secretary to carry out these responsibilities. By law, the Secretary has considerable discretion in the use of ESF resources. And this is the final description of this. It goes on to say the legal basis of the ESF is the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. And that was passed right after they confiscated all of America's gold, all the public's gold. As amended in the late 70s, the Act provides in part that the Department of the Treasury has a stabilization fund. Well, stabilization is another term for intervention or manipulation, right? Consistent with the obligations of the government in the IMF and on orderly exchange rates and an orderly system of exchange rates. The secretary, and this is the kicker here, the secretary, with the approval of the president, may deal in gold, foreign exchange, and other instruments of credit and securities. So there you have it, hidden in plain sight. The U.S. Treasury admit they can intervene in the markets and manipulate gold, foreign exchange, and what does other instruments of credit and securities mean? Well, these mean bonds, could mean equities, could mean anything. It's open-ended. It could even mean derivatives, because you could have derivatives on credit markets, on securities, on anything. So here you have, the U.S. Treasury Secretary having a go at the Chinese for manipulation. When I actually think the Chinese are only following the lead of the United States. I'm not an American, of course, but I think even Americans should be critical of this, because, the basis of the American experience, the American philosophy is free markets, small government, and I think it's incumbent upon people to bring this up. This ESF shouldn't even exist. Should the U.S. Treasury really manipulate markets? And it was done, in my opinion, using World War I draconian laws, where they could confiscate America's money or the gold in 1933, and then use that to manipulate markets. And they've been doing it since then. And it's gotten worse. It gets worse and worse. And the other thing they did in 1933 and 34 is that they, if your great grandparents or grandparents went in to hand in their gold coins, for a gold eagle, they got just, $20 for an ounce. And then in 1934, when they passed the Gold Reserve Act, they revalued it to up to 35. So who made all the money from that scheme, from that manipulation? It was not the public. The public got $20.67 for that ounce of gold. And then a few months later, that ounce of gold was worth 35, but it was the Treasury who benefited from it. And they've been using those funds ever since to manipulate markets. So, yeah, Mnuchin did work for Goldman Sachs years ago. Rick W. just finished my video on inflation. Yeah, I know it's early. 6:30, Diana, as she's in Kansas. You guys are 6 hours behind. Dean Reynolds, Graham notes, really, they make me angry. Yeah, I mean, it's hypocritical, isn't it, to criticize the Chinese? Am I saying the Chinese are right in manipulating currencies? No, but I think in the fiat money system, where governments, can, and the banking sector can create money out of thin air, where there's no anchor, a gold anchor or silver anchor, where the government is in charge of the money. This is always going to happen. So yeah, Alazia Rostani. Yeah, I remember him talking about that years ago. Also, a good article is by the guy from Rolling Stone magazine about the vampire squid. I forgot the guy's name. That was written, I think, in 2010 or 11. Yeah, it says here they do manipulate gold prices. The last, I put the link to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, and I'll put it again on the chat here, and you can have a look. They even admit it. It says, with the approval of the president, the ESF may deal in gold, foreign exchange, and other instruments of credit and securities. The other thing about this other instruments of credit and securities, it could mean, derivatives on anything. So you can bet that the ESF is very busy, and I would venture to say that they deal out of the U.S. And you might argue, what do you mean? Well, I remember years ago when the Secretary of the Treasury was John Snow under George Bush Jr. He came to visit London, and in the headlines in the papers here, they showed a photo of him visiting the dealing room of J.P. Morgan Bank in London. So why would he be meeting at J.P. Morgan London, the Secretary of the Treasury of the U.S.? Why would he come to London to meet an American bank? Well, I would have to say that the JP Morgan London is probably heavily involved in manipulating the markets for the ESF. And back then it was John Snow. Today it's Steve Mnuchin, or Munchkin, if you want to call him. Let's see. Yeah, Pat, they have hypothecated the 2 billion. I think that's how much they had at the start, the ESF. That's hypothecated many times over, so they can throw it around a lot. I think they even used the ESF back in the 90s to help save Mexico from the tequila crisis. Hyrule Legend, good afternoon, Hyrule Legend. So what are the markets doing this morning? Well, gold came off a little bit earlier. We're now almost unchanged, just below 1190. Silver is 1439. The Dow is up 44 points, but not much happening. The dollar is a little weaker across against the euro and the pound. You have to excuse me 1 second. I'll be back in a minute. As you can see, Billy is here today. I just had to turn something off. Something was beeping outside. Oh, you're welcome, Hyrule, about the inflation video. I had talked about that probably over a year ago. The thing is, it's good to touch upon those subjects once in a while because you get a lot of new subscribers. You get like news that fit into that subject. All the talk about Turkey. People are really shocked in Turkey with high inflation. I'm not. I told people about 2 years ago here in the UK, when the pound started dropping quite sharply, even before Brexit, that we're going to have higher prices. People said, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, the currency is going down, and that's what happens when the currency, debases, when they print too much of it, and that's all it is. It's the supply of money, the growth in the supply of money outweighs the growth in the production of real goods, and that's what it's all about. It's very simple. You could teach that to a 6-year-old, I think. But the PhD economists we have today, they make you can see sometimes in the papers they say, oh, inflation is pushed higher because of the rise in holiday flights to holiday destinations. Inflation rises because of hotel room price rises. And that's like getting it backwards. So yeah, we haven't got many people on, only 78, but I usually do my live streams later, but I thought I'd do something about Steve Mnuchin. Now I'll put a link here to the Zero Hedge story where he's saying that the Chinese have been manipulating the yuan, and there you go. But Yeah, that's the thing with the fiat money. Governments will always cheat. They will always print more money. They think that having a weaker currency is good for exports, but actually, when Germany did really well throughout the 1950s, 1960s, and 70s, it became an economic industrial powerhouse. The Deutschmark was actually strengthening. So it doesn't follow that you need to debase your currency and inflate it away. You only get poverty, misery, inequality from that. Moosehead, with Brazil going more conservative in its government, how do you see employment, crime, currency strength? Will Brazil slang China? Well, we don't know yet what's going to happen. They have a second round on the 28th of October. It is highly likely that the right wing guy will win. How much it will change Brazil? Probably not that much. Might improve it. Relations with the U.S. could be good with Trump. I'm not sure about the deep state, or who knows. Um, Brazil, I think Brazil is fairly close already with the BRICS nation. It might, I think, and that was done more with the Workers' Party when they were in power. Maybe that will not be as close as it used to with the if the guy, not Temer, but Bolsonaro wins as he's expected to. Azure, Ron Paul's talking about 50% stock market drop within the next year or so. What is it? Timing is difficult. There are a lot of people calling for, well, who have said that the top is this year, and that in the next year or two, or even 2.5 years, we're going to see a big drop. The Dow has failed to go back. It has gone back above the January high, but now is back below it. The S&P is just hovering above that high. So it's going to be touch and go now, especially with U.S. Treasury yields going a lot higher. Right now, the 10-year yield is at 323. It's up 2 basis points. Has come off the highs from yesterday at 326. Do you believe in vitamin C therapy? I couldn't say. I haven't looked into that. Sorry, Key VJ. It depends, Hyrule. Exporters, a lot of times, they need to buy raw materials from other countries. So if your currency is weaker, yeah, your final product, you might think that it would be easier to export, but if you are buying a lot of raw materials to make your product in Germany, it might not have an advantage. But I think the euro had, the Deutschmark would be a lot stronger than the euro is. Some people argue that that helps Germany, but I would beg to differ. Maybe Germany could be doing even better with the Deutschmark. D's, how long do you think the communists in China will allow Xi to retaliate against the tariffs, encouraging poverty and misery in his country? Don't really get that question. How can it be encourage poverty and misery if you retaliate against tariffs? I don't understand that. I don't know. Don't know what you mean there, D's. I would venture to say that not only China is communist. I would say, the U.S. is pretty, if not communist, is very fascist. We've got like the Wall Street and yeah, basically Wall Street running the whole show. So we got, it's not very different from China. So I don't see any difference between. So I actually think China is doing the right thing, trying to protect China. So I don't really get your question. And yeah, the United States is not a free market economy. Not at all. That's what they want you to believe. They're communists. We're free, but it's not. It's what Alex Jones is spouting out now. The Chinese are the enemy. I think the Chinese just want to do business. Do their state industry? Did they have more state industries? Yeah. Well, General Motors was taken over by the government. RBS here is owned by the government. So what's the difference? Oh, a government's weakening currency encourage poverty? Yeah, they do. It does. But so does the U.S. The U.S. does. What do you think printing trillions a year, like the Treasury is doing? Deficit spending that encourages poverty as well. The U.S. is manipulating its currency just as much. So there you go. But what I'm trying to say is that Mnuchin is hypocritical. He's having a go at the Chinese for retaliating, for manipulation. And I'm not saying it's right. I think governments should not be involved in money. Money should be sound and determined by the market. Governments always corrupt money. Money should be a store of value. And if you didn't have money, you would barter, and you barter value for value, right? And that's what money has to be. Damiano, do you think Italy should leave the EU? Probably, but Italy also has to look at itself in the mirror. Italy is a profligate government. The you know Italian labor laws are not really conducive to free markets. So Italy has a lot to answer for itself, but yeah, it would probably be easier for them to carry all their debt if they're out of the euro. They don't have to be out of the EU. They could leave the euro and adopt their currency again. People don't, need to understand there's a difference between the EU and the euro. You could be in the EU like the UK is now and use your own currency. The UK never used the euro and it was still in the EU. So Italy could stay in the EU and adopt the euro, but it would probably be better to leave both altogether. Paul Abert, any thoughts on the midterm elections in the US and how outcome might affect markets and gold and silver in particular? I tend to think that the Republicans will do well. Yeah, so it could probably, when Trump won a few years ago, the markets rallied a lot. If they do well, the markets could rally. It might not be the greatest thing for gold and silver in the short term, but I still think, you know, the U.S. economy is and all the cheerleading is not really, how can I say, realistic. It's more cheerleading than anything. The only reason the U.S. economy looks like it's doing well is because they've got, the U.S. Treasury is running a 5% of GDP budget deficit. There's a lot of government spending going in the U.S., the country that's not supposed to be communist. Uh, while Germany, who's supposed to be, European and socialist, they have a budget surplus of 1.2%, while their GDP is like 2%. In the U.S. GDP, they can't even get it up to like 3% per annum, and they've got a budget deficit of almost 5%, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse this next fiscal year. I think the Treasury is going to run 2 trillion in deficit instead of 1.3 they ran last year. So yeah, in the short term, it could help markets. Maybe not so much gold and silver, but in the long term, it's I think the economic policy of the current administration and Congress with their budgets, and what's his name, Larry Kudlow, who's like a CNBC shill. I mean, I'm not too optimistic about things going forward. But it could be a little bit of a sugar rush after the election. Hope that answers your question. Richard McCorkindale, if their mouths are moving, they're lying. Good point. Peter Weitzinger, who really controls America? Well, it's Wall Street, the bankers, I would say. And they control everything else. Moosehead, I was looking to buy gold on a visit to Colombia. How much profit do miners have in an ounce of retail gold? I have seen everywhere from 250 to 750 customers. I don't know, Moosehead. I couldn't tell you. I've never been to Colombia, and I don't really know exactly what the cost of production there is. I think as a whole, for the big gold producers, we're very near the cost of production right now, if not below it. Vazi, thank you for the super chat donation. Please buy Billy a doggy treat. Oh, I will. Billy says thank you. He's just jumped off the sofa to go to sleep a bit. Continue to sleep. Oh, just show you something. I bought some of these shillings on eBay, and they're like from the 1930s. So they're UK coins, and by then the UK coins were 50% silver. But I bought 18 of them. It's not too much, but I think it was good value. I paid £20 for 1.6 ounces of silver. So I went to pick that up today. They tried to deliver it yesterday, but I wasn't home, so I had to go to the sorting office. So sometimes I buy, they call it junk silver. Of course it's not junk, but it's there's no VAT on. I've got quite a few of the old English coins. What you have to understand is from 1920 to 1947, there's only 50% of silver. From 1947, there's no silver. And prior to 1920, it was sterling silver, hence the name of the currency of this country, sterling, and have 925 of silver. So that's what I did this morning after I did my video. I walked to the sorting office instead of driving. It's good to walk. Is it worth noting Germany has benefited from not having expensive providing a military since 1945 U.S. troops on their soil? Well, there's two sides to that coin, Hyrule. I think if the U.S. and the U.K. the troops weren't there, I would doubt the U.S. dollar would be the reserve currency of the world. I would say Germany would have long time ago have adopted maybe a gold standard, or maybe not really used the dollar that much. So, and the Germans didn't ask the Americans and the British to come and occupy Germany. So I think it's two sides of the coin. The other thing as well, the American military benefits a lot from being in Germany. If you removed all those troops out of Germany, it's like where are you gonna? It's all government spending for the U.S. So I'm sure the Germans would love to see the Americans leave, but I think it's more the Americans and the British that still want to occupy Germany. So we could argue that Germany is not a free country. A lot of other European, I think there are U.S. troops even here in the U.K. So the U.K. is not really free. Italy. So I think France is the only country that's kind of doesn't have U.S. troops. But the U.S. doesn't have to be there. The war ended in 1945. I mean, that's almost 80 years ago. What are they doing there? So I think the Americans benefit a lot more from being there. It's a base for their operations when they, especially the wars in the Middle East. It's a great place to have their military. So I think Trump is using that more to try to rally, to say that he's doing something for America. I think what he should do, if he's really truthful about making America great again, just withdraw the troops from Germany. But I see that Americans now, the American military is putting missiles in the Ukraine. So sorry guys, you guys, I'm not blaming Americans, but your government wants to be everywhere. Germany does have an army. Yeah, Peter Oetzinger says the Germans do want them out. Morning, Susan. Susan from Texas. Susan Chappell, nice to see you, Susan. For those who are coming on now, the title of my live stream is "We Can Manipulate Markets, but You Can't," and that's in reference to the U.S. Treasury Secretary, who's come out and said that China is manipulating the yuan, and he's going to have to talk with the Chinese about that. And then I noted that the U.S. Treasury has been manipulating markets since 1934 with the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And the Treasury website even admits, it says here at the end, consistent with the obligations of the government in the IMF on orderly exchange arrangements and an orderly system of exchange rates, the Secretary, with the approval of the President, may deal in gold, foreign exchange, and other instruments of credit and securities. So what is orderly system of exchange rates, So he could add, financial markets to that as well. So that's what we've been talking about, Susan. If you if you are curious. Oh no, Vox, wasn't that part of the deal, Germany and Japan to have limited military power? I agree. Right after the war, that seemed reasonable, but that war was like has been over for many years. I think it doesn't apply to them today, in my opinion. Richard McCorkin, there's no K in Americans. Yeah, but I guess there's a K in for the American government, the way they act. It's funny about America and Germany because I've read that prior to World War One, the German language was pretty much like Spanish is nowadays in the U.S. There was a lot of German speakers, and there was a debate of whether German should become an official language as well. Not official, but a used language that would be used a lot in the U.S. There are a lot of German schools. Even today, I think if you look at the percentage, majority of Americans are of German descent. But with World War One and all the propaganda that came, vilifying the Germans, that was dropped very quickly, and people stopped speaking German in public. I think it's a shame. It's a shame because U.S. could be like Switzerland. English and German and maybe even Spanish. It could be like a multilingual country like Switzerland. Peter says, ich kann ja auch auf Deutsch schreiben, wenn Sie wollen. I guess he says, I can also write in German when you'd like. So I understand a bit of German. I guess Peter's name is German. I think you're in Australia, though, aren't you? Richard is a Frankfurter. Frankfurter. So yeah, that's interesting. History is interesting. I think the majority of there's a lot of German people of German descent, I guess, in the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Ohio, everywhere, I guess. If you can't speak English, don't fly a plane. Yeah, Frankfurt is also sausage. Also, a Berliner is a donut. That's JFK. When he went to Berlin, he said he was a donut. Ich bin ein Berliner, didn't he? That was quite. The Germans must have thought that was funny. El Tomo, where are you, El Tomo? Three national languages. Yeah, ich bin Berliner. Yeah, and he said ich bin ein Berliner. That meant, yeah. Yeah, German Dutch. I think they call it Dutch because it's like they weren't like Dutch from Holland, but they were Deutsch, and I think that they kind of misspelt it and said Dutch. Uh, Pennsylvania. Yeah, he was a sweet bun. Yeah. All right, so let's just. I'm gonna. I'm gonna like. This is gonna be a shorter live stream, and but before I go, I'll just check the markets. Yeah, gold is languishing here, not doing much. Down now to 1187, a couple of dollars. Silver 1434. The Dow's unchanged. S&P is down now. The Nasdaq is now down 1/3%. The Nasdaq future. We still got a bit of time until the market opens. Let's see the 10-year yield. Where are we? 322, so up 2 basis points. Italy, just an update on Italy. Earlier this morning, yields had spiked higher to like 361. It was up like 13 on the day, but now it's back down to 348. So Italian bond market still very, how can I say, volatile. So yeah, thanks everyone. This was just a quick live stream. If you enjoyed this video or live stream and you're not a subscriber, make sure you subscribe. I will record this and publish it as a video for those who missed most of it. And I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.